Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. The website is aroundtheempire.com. This is listener-supported, independent media. Please pitch in if you can at patreon.com/aroundtheempire, paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Follow on Twitter at Around the Empire, and please help build up the YouTube channel by subscribing. It's free, youtube.com/aroundtheempire. Doug Valentine joins us today to talk about the CIA warrior class. As he says, they truly believe the heroic myth they've created about themselves, quote, endowing the warrior class with the highest social values while justifying the tragic consequences of their imperial marauding as fate, unquote. Doug Valentine is an author, investigator, journalist, and poet. He's the author of many books, including The Phoenix Program, America's Use of Terror in Vietnam, and The CIA as Organized Crime, How Illegal Operations Corrupt America and the World. He's well known for his extensive research and interviews of numerous CIA officers, former CIA Director William Colby, and others involved in the Phoenix Program. The Phoenix Program was a large operation that involved kidnapping, torture, and assassination. Its goal was the destruction of the Viet Cong insurgency, a political and paramilitary movement that worked against the United States and US-backed South Vietnamese government during the Vietnam War. We recorded this on May 18th, 2019. Doug Valentine joins us today from Massachusetts. Doug, welcome to Around the Empire. It's great to talk with you.
Oh, thank you very much for having me on your show.
So I have your latest book here, The CIA as Organized Crime, How Illegal Operations Corrupt America and the World. And your other book, The Phoenix Program, is also of great interest to me, especially your observations about the way the Phoenix Program became the foundation for other programs, and like entire infrastructures now used to run the wars and the empire, if you will, and now used at home too, unfortunately. So there's a lot about that in the latest book, which is kind of structured around that. And also I wanted to mention that some years ago, I came across your audio archives. I must have read a comment or an article about how you had made these archives available. And the ones I listened to were some interviews with former CIA Director William Colby, which I guess is where some of this all started, right? But it's pretty amazing, first of all, those interviews. For those who don't know, William Colby was the CIA director from 1973 to 1976. And during the infamous Church Committee and Pike Committee hearings. And then he died under some kind of mysterious circumstances in 1996. But it's just stunning that you got those interviews and then the contacts that he gave you and what it led to. So I don't know how much we can fit into one interview, Doug, but the three things that interest me most are the interviews with Colby, the Phoenix Program and how it evolves, and of course that's a huge topic, and maybe a little bit about how the drug trade plays into all of this, which is a subject that happens to be intensely personal for me, by the way, because of how it's affected my life and some people very precious to me. So maybe that'll have to wait for another interview. I don't know if we can manage to get, if I can manage to get more of your time later, I'm going to try. But let me just mention one more thing. I'm also very curious about, and I've seen a lot of this in your latest book, where you apply what you've learned and you analyze some of the current situations and crises, and you apply what you've learned and offer some analysis and clarity on that. And I'm always interested in that too. So I think this is probably impossible to cover in one talk, but let's give it a try and see where it goes.
Okay, well, every one of these subjects turned into a book.
Yes.
And in some cases, not adventure story books, but kind of reference books that could help people who are really seriously interested in studying these things. And I don't want to get into that kind of a academic, kind of conversation, but I'd like to tell you about Colby first of all, because that was probably the most unusual, well, the first of a series of very unusual things that happened to me. I had written a book about my father, who was in World War II, and he was in a prison camp in the Philippines, a Japanese POW camp. And I had not gotten along with my father. I was 30 when he called me up and said, "Come home. I understand you want to be a writer. I got a story to tell you." He had had open heart surgery. So um, I went down and we repaired our relationship, and we had been victims of what was called the generation gap.
I remember that. I
You
do
know,
remember that.
I'm going to be 70. It's really something that happened between the World War II generation of fathers and their sons, and was prompted by the Vietnam War. So I wrote this book about my father, and it was of great interest to people because my father and I reconciled, and people who read the book were as interested in that aspect of the story as they were in the events that happened to my father in the world, in the war. So after I finished that book, I wanted to write a book about Vietnam, which had affected my generation and still affects it now in astronomical, stratospherical ways that remain unspoken and also spoken about a lot, but never really understood. And my generation is still trying to work through all that. And you see it with people's reactions to Donald Trump having avoided the draft 5 times, and yet at the same time commanding the respect of a lot of military people. How can these things be?
So, Doug, you would have graduated high school then around 1968, right?
Well, I was a dropout.
Okay, well, then
Yeah,
people
I,
you're
I graduated high school in 1967, and I went to college, and I was a college dropout, and I did tree work, working for a tree service for 10 years.
right.
But I wanted to write about an aspect of Vietnam that nobody had ever written about before, and somebody suggested the Phoenix program. And William Colby had been the overseer of the CIA's Phoenix program in Vietnam. So I sent him a copy of the book I had written about my father. Now, Colby is a fascinating character. In World War II, he had been in the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, which was the predecessor organization to the CIA. And he had done some heroic things in World War II. In 1944, he parachuted into France and commanded a group of partisans in sabotage operations against the Germans behind enemy lines. And he had done, really kind of heroic things. And it's funny, he doesn't look like a soldier. He's this little slim, bespectacled guy about 5'8", and
Uh,
doesn't look like he could fight his way out of a paper bag. But here he was doing these kind of paramilitary espionage operations in World War II. So, right away you learn that what somebody looks like doesn't uh, determine what they're capable of doing in a war. Lots of times the big, heroic, strong guys are the ones that don't live up to the moment, but Colby did. And anyway, so he joined the CIA when it was in its formative years after World War II, and uh, became an important person in the CIA. But at the same and when the Phoenix program was formed in 1967 in Saigon, he was head of the Far East Asia division in the CIA, which was a very big, important position, and he oversaw the implementation of the Phoenix program. And when it was created, he arranged for one of his friends from the OSS, a guy named Evan Parker, who was also a career CIA officer, to head the Phoenix program. Okay, now I'll just talk about those people. And So I sent him this book about my father, and he read it. And he said, "Yeah, come down to Washington." And I went. He was at that point, which is 1984, an attorney in Washington D.C., but a big lobbying firm on K Street. And I sort of interviewed for the job of writing the book about the Phoenix program more than I interviewed him. You know, he was checking me out, and I went down there. I cut my hair and I put on a suit and a tie, and presented myself as a good, Methodist, objective person. And he liked the story, but he was also interested in that part of the story about my father and I reconciling. Almost all the CIA officers I met and talked with when I was writing this, that he referred me to, and then he paved the way for me. We're all interested in the fact that my father and I had reconciled, and I was interviewing CIA officers who were from that World War II generation, and they were all feeling misunderstood. And because Colby had referred me to them, and they all took this kind of avuncular interest in me, and like they were finally getting a chance to tell their side of the story to their sons, many of whom they were estranged from, the way I had been estranged from my father. So there was this dynamic that was going on behind the scenes. And because I had gone through that reconciliation process with my father, I was able to replicate the same sort of, create the same sort of conditions with them, which is one of the reasons they all revealed to me their secrets. And there's this, if you treat these CIA officers like human beings, they respond like human beings. But at the time, I was being vilified, and this is when I started doing my research into the CIA. Was right in the midst of the Iran-Contra controversy, and the CIA was at the forefront of that because they were the people that were waging the wars, the clandestine wars in El Salvador and Nicaragua at the time. And a lot of people on the left were just very angry with me that I had gone and I was talking with Colby. You know, they saw this as kind of a betrayal. How can you talk to this monster? And all these other monsters that I was talking to. And it was very strange. For many years, the left would have nothing to do with me. And even when the book came out, because I presented them, I just recorded what they said. And I did not say, they're terrible, horrible people that did horrible things. I told about what they did. But as part of the process of getting their story, I had to actually, put all my judgments aside in order to get them to trust me. So that was an interesting dynamic and something that happened. But the first guy that Colby referred me to was this man, Evan Parker, who had also been in the OSS. And Parker had been in Burma and China with the OSS. And he had quite a different experience than Colby, but the same in several ways. And when Colby created the Phoenix program in Vietnam, he arranged for this fellow, Evan Parker, to become the head. So this was the first person that Colby referred me to once he had agreed to help me write the book. And I went to visit Parker at his home in Rockville, Maryland. And he had recently had a little stroke. He was a big, tall guy, taller than me, probably 6'2". I'm like 6 feet tall. Ruddy face. He was at the time a deacon in his church. I think it was the Episcopalian church. And he was very proud that they were training a woman to become the first deacon in their church. These were interesting times, and he invited me up to his study. He had a little study, nice suburban house. And we talked about Welsh poetry. He was learning the Welsh language for like an hour. I never asked him any questions. Again, I was trying to form relationships with these people. And after an hour, he said, "I'm going to go downstairs and make us some tea and get us some cookies. I'll be gone for about 15 minutes. And he had left a file on top of a coffee table. And as he's leaving the room, he sort of winks at me. And the minute he was gone, I opened up the file, and it was a roster listing everybody who was in the original Phoenix Directorate in Saigon, with their name and their rank, and I just furiously copied down the name. I mean, it was like one of the biggest breaks I got in writing this book was to know who these people were, and they're CIA officers, military officers, State Department officers. There were like 30 or 40 of them. And I furiously wrote down all the names, and he called from downstairs about 15 minutes later, and he said, "Doug, the tea's ready. I'm coming up." And I put away my notebook and closed the folder, which was the only file I ever ended up looking at. And he came up, and we went back to talking about Welsh poetry and the Episcopalian Church and stuff like that. But what I want to get at is that, like, I met him like a year later to do a follow-up interview. And he and I went to an officers club in Fort Myers in Virginia. Okay, so we drove over there. It was February. It was a freezing cold day. There was like a wintry mix in the snow and sleet, and we had to park in a parking lot that was elevated above the officers club, and we had to walk down a wooden staircase to get to the officers club. So he had this stroke, and we were both wearing nice dress coats because everybody at this officers club had generals wearing their military uniforms. It had black waiters dressed up in tuxedos, with white gloves. It was right out of the antebellum South,
Yeah.
And we were walking down this staircase, and we got to a little landing where it cut back and went down, a little bit further, and we were standing there, and his arm was locked in mine, and he looked up into the heavens, and his face was ruddy from this wintry mix, and he didn't have a hat on or anything, and he said, "When I was in the OSS, they told us that someday you're going to be behind enemy lines in France, and you're going to be in a farmhouse, and you're going to be talking to members of the resistance about blowing up a German train. And after you're done talking, you're going to notice that in another room, an 8-year-old boy was listening to everything you were discussing." And he looked up with this sorrowful look. And he said, "And they tell you, you know what you have to do." And I was standing there on these steps with him thinking, well, I know what I have to do, and that's push you down the steps. But these were the sorts of things that were happening to me repeatedly throughout my writing this book on the CIA, where these people, I would gain their confidence out of nowhere. They would confess these sorts of things to me, which I did not put into the book. And, we went down and we had this nice lunch at the officers club with another CIA guy who he was introducing me to, who had run all the detention, who had run the detention program, which was part of the Phoenix program, where they were trying to figure out what to do with all the people they detained. The Phoenix program this guy Parker ran the Phoenix program from 1967 to 1969. Again, when you think of what it was and what they were doing, it's horrific, okay? And they would sit in this office, sit with me in the officers club at Fort Myers and tell me very matter-of-factly what they were doing. So, and it was to detain people who were considered to be threats to national security, which meant they were communists, or they were part of the secret government, which was supporting the Viet Cong. And the CIA, because they were civilians, it had fallen upon the CIA to go out and identify them and get them. And CIA lawyers were writing up the laws of South Vietnam. There were like 200 lawyers, Vietnamese lawyers in South Vietnam. The legal system had been created by the French. They did not have, South Vietnamese did not have a legal system like ours. They did not have lawyers. So the CIA was running up all the laws for South Vietnam. And then somebody from one of the puppets from the South Vietnamese government would say, well, we have a new law. Or the president like Trump would issue by fiat a decree saying, I'm changing the laws. And now the law is this, or now the law is that. And they created this law called Administrative Detention Law, which anybody who was considered a threat to national security could be arrested on charges based on one anonymous informant. And there was no evidence presented in court. No evidence needed to present it in court to convict these people. And they had established the CIA starting in 1965, which eventually became the foundation stone of the Phoenix program, created an interrogation center in each of South Vietnam's 44 provinces. They built them. Pacific architects and engineers built them, designed a design for them and built them. And anybody who was thought to be a threat to national security could be kidnapped in the middle of the night and sent to one of these interrogation centers where waterboarding was the least of the horrible things that were done to them.
Oh, great.
And so this guy that Parker introduced me to was, and part of that. I interviewed the CIA officer, a guy named John Muldoon, who built the wall in 65 and 66 in South Vietnam. That's in my book too. And when they couldn't capture a person, then they would send out death squads to just bump them off. And they had death squads in every district. There were 244 districts, and they had CIA created a death squad that would go out and bump off these people, and they would do it in the most ghastly ways. They would do it in a way that was had a psychological impact, which is to terrify everybody else. So Evan Parker, this nice guy who was studying to be, helping a woman become a deacon in his church, is in charge of this program. Okay, the My Lai massacre is actually part of it. Doing these most ghastly things. If one of his neighbors' houses was on fire in Rockville, Maryland, this guy Evan Parker would drop everything and run into the house and save the babies and the cats and the dogs. So, in understanding what the CIA is, you can look at these people and you can get an understanding that they can be church-going, loving husbands, loving fathers whose children never know anything that they are doing, and what the gravity is of the things that they do, or the horror of the things that they do. And at the same time, they can do these terrible, horrible things, and they can feel self-righteous about it because they're doing it to preserve our right to worship God. The communists are godless, and the communists have only one political party. Unlike the United States, where we have the Democrats and the Republicans, which a lot of people would say is one political party too.
Yeah.
Nobody else can get into the game here. You're either a Republican or a Democrat, and that's it. And they basically always vote on the same things anyway. Even though there's, qualitatively no difference between the two. So they justify what they do by these myths about freedom and God. And so, those are the things that you have to understand in order to understand the CIA and why CIA officers do the things they do, the myths that we believe in, which justify going out and doing these horrible things. So those are the things now in this advanced stage in my career that I'm trying to make people understand, is that you actually have to look at your own beliefs and how they justify the support that the American people give to CIA officers and that allow them to do the things that they do. and that's really the problem. Is not the CIA officers themselves, who, if you meet them in the grocery store or at church, seem like, and everybody always says to me, they're good people. They're good folks. They would help you out if you needed a helping hand. That's not the problem. The problem is us supporting them and not understanding why we do that, and why the myths that we believe about, whether it be God or freedom and democracy and those things, enable us to do it.
Yeah, you talk about that. I think you refer to it as the heroic myth, and that
Yes.
they endow themselves as the warrior class with the highest of social virtues. I think I have your sentence here. You say that they truly believe in this heroic myth that they've created about themselves, endowing the warrior class with the highest social virtues while justifying the tragic consequences of their imperial marauding as fate.
Yes, and that's exactly the thing that I'm trying to focus on, and what you see every day in the Pentagon is the biggest advertiser in the United States. They advertise. They spend more money on advertising and recruiting young men than any corporation spends on advertising its commodities. So this kind of psychological warfare that the CIA and the military wage against young American men and women, and once they've been bought into the myth, they carry it forward on their own. But they spend billions of dollars every year waging this propaganda war against young people and all Americans, getting them to believe in this myth of the hero, that the military and the CIA are protectors, and that they're protecting our rights and our freedoms and our right to worship God. And they send them off to fight wars that they claim are to defend us. And once these guys, these innocents, die, their death becomes the fodder for the myth. You can't, a parent can't, once they've sent their child off to die in a war, can never disbelieve that war was not a noble cause. Because if you say, my son went off to fight in Vietnam, and he just wanted to make a difference and protect those people in South Vietnam from the communists, and he came back without his legs, or he died, you can't, as a human being, say that that really wasn't the truth, because you then dishonor your son. So we're caught in this vicious cycle of the United States finding reasons to fight war after war after war. And all these young people get sacrificed in these wars, and then their sacrifice becomes the basis in our believing that what they did was right. And they really are just sacrificial lambs, and their death is exploited by the military and the CIA in order to keep fighting more and more wars that only benefit the highest economic strata in the United States, the people who are in the arms industry, or the people who are in the oil industry, who now own all the oil in Iraq. You guys all know the story, but it's understanding it at this human level that's essential to understanding it, why it keeps going on over and over and over again, and why it's very important for average everyday people to try and grasp what's happening, and how this relentless propaganda and psychological warfare that's directed against them actually is responsible for their beliefs and their actions. And they're not even, to a large extent, aware of it. But the people who are creating these myths, creating this myth of the hero, for example, are perfectly and cynically aware of what they're doing.
And I think you mentioned in here, well, you mentioned the corporate infrastructure that they are really defending, that they're really, what their real purpose is. I don't know if you want to go into that or not.
Well, sure. And let me give you an example. When I interviewed Colby, like I said, he had been a lawyer before World War II, and was always a lawyer. He always kept his, he had a law degree and he had a license. And after he got out of the CIA, he became a lawyer for a lobbying firm. So why did this lobbying Congress, to pass particular laws or to represent foreign clients, why would they hire a former director of the Central Intelligence Agency? Well, because just like all the CIA officers that he sent me to gave me interviews because of his word. Like Evan Parker said to me, I'm going to tell you things that I'm not allowed. I gave an oath that I would not tell secrets. But because Colby said, talk to him, I will talk to you and tell you these secrets, because Colby was the director of the CIA. And if he says to do it, I salute and I do it. And this has happened over and over and over again. Well, Colby brought that kind of influence to this lobbying firm. So I remember being in his office the first time I saw him. And he said he got a call and he said, excuse me for a minute. And he picks up the phone and he says to the person who's calling him, which was probably his boss at this lobbying firm, the lawyer who owned the lobbying firm, don't worry. Our guy in the Philippine Congress is going to make sure that that vote gets passed. So he has connections in the Philippines, in their Congress. And Westinghouse wants to build, let's say, a nuclear power plant in the Philippines. Well, a guy like Colby has the connections in the Philippines, in their House of Representatives, in their industry, and they're at the highest levels of their industry, that he can help this law firm get that get that contract through for Westinghouse. Now, when you consider the fact that the CIA is over 70 years old, it has been in business since basically World War II. How many hundreds of thousands of CIA officers, foreign, who are retired or who are current, are spread throughout the United States and throughout the world. And the influence that this secret group of people have in advancing corporate interests around the world. And it's all secret because you don't know their names and you don't know what businesses they went into after they retired. But they are all, once they've been in the CIA, still CIA officers. And they are still bound by their secrecy agreements. And they're still loyal to whoever is in charge of the CIA. And they do whatever the CIA tells them to do. And the CIA can reach into this parallel society within the United States. It's like a parallel society that is controlling all the major things that are happening in our lives. And it includes people who are not just and when I say the corporate world, we're talking about the board of directors of the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, all the major media outlets, which in the last 30 and 40 years have been consolidating. It's now down to about 6 or 7 entities that own 90% of the media in the United States. Well, guess who's controlling their board of directors and aligning them with the secret interests of this, for lack of a better word, the deep state. Well, it's this network of CIA officers like Colby. And at the highest level, a CIA officer like William Colby is no different than the president or owner of the New York Times or Exxon. These are the same people. They're sitting on the same boards. They're going to the same dances on Saturday night. Their children go to the same schools. They're intermarried. And not only that, they're all over the world. They're now in the Israeli lobbies. Just you can't. There's not a part of the world where they're not dominant. And the thing that makes them dominant is their secrecy. The fact that they do this all in secret. and that they can create the laws and financial institutions and the propaganda in every country around the world, except to a large extent Russia and China.
Yeah, I
But
was just going to say the two places where they are not are certainly Russia and China, maybe India. But I had never thought about it in this context before, where the CIA is 70 years old and they've been accumulating. And
it's just
I mean,
it's just mind blowing to think of it. Okay, and this is the thing that you need to understand about the CIA. Not everything that you see in the press about the CIA, and even guys like Seymour Hersh, who are considered to be the experts on the CIA, they talk about a particular CIA operation in Iraq. They talk about a particular CIA operation in El Salvador or Afghanistan, or they say the CIA is having a conflict with the military here or there. They don't explain to you. And the New York Times is not going to do it. And probably Democracy Now! Is not going to do it, or The Nation. This sort of comprehensive way of understanding the CIA and the human way of understanding the CIA that you need to figure out what the influence it has on our society. It's not just they're doing some dastardly thing in Iran like now, or they're affixing bombs to Saudi Arabian ships in order to provoke a war in Iran. Well, sure, they're doing that. And that's what they do everywhere on an individual basis. But that's the sort of sensational view of the CIA that can be turned into a Jason Bourne movie and make them into heroes and continue to spread this myth of the CIA as heroic people who are defending our interests against Iran or Russia or China. Whereas the way that really needs to be understood is in this way that I'm trying to get it across to you in the hour that we have today, in this human way of how they control things behind the scenes. And it's very class oriented. Okay, I have spoken to CIA officers who uh, um, were guys who came out of the working class. But once they're in the CIA, they become protected people for the rest of their lives. And they go through this Alger Hiss kind of transformation where they become guardians of this ruling class that they have become part of. And you see this happening throughout the United States now, and it's another tremendous threat to our freedoms because it is basically, after all these many years of the CIA being in existence, the implementation of the Phoenix program here in the United States. Okay, it's all the police forces are now part of this apparatus, that the secret parallel universe. You can see it by the way that they recently reacted down in front of the Venezuelan embassy, where they actually invaded a foreign nation's embassy without any legal authorization, other than coming from our current dictator Donald Trump telling them to do it. There's international law no longer matters. Okay, and the judges that have been put in place in the country are all part of this now, and they're going to say yes. These people need to be held under administrative detention laws because they're a threat to national security. And what's the national security? The will of the executive.
which is
Okay,
exactly what you just
all these
described.
things are being put in place, and they have been incrementally put in place, and they are being incrementally put in place using this myth of the hero, that these guys are heroic and they're protecting us, and it's totally without any equivocation for the interest of our corporate ruling class, which is the same as the CIA. And these people in our police forces and our military are the action agencies, the protectors of this corporate class, and they're the ones who believe they're the heroes. Okay, and they're not. They have become really the enemies of democracy. And it's happening all across the country. And I know it's a lot for any individual to absorb and to process in 45 minutes or an hour, but that's really what is taking place. And Americans are so brainwashed that the minute the media leaps into action and says Iran is sabotaging American ships in the Gulf, and we have to teach them a lesson. And believe us, it'll only take 100,000 troops to do the job. And then the next thing you know, you have another Vietnam or another Iraq war. But in the beginning, all the flags are flying and everybody's saying, yes, we have to do this. And our boys are going off to war. So we have to support the troops. And it just is endless the way this goes on.
Yeah, I think a lot of people who are woke, if you will, or kind of understand what's going on, will diagnose our current problem as a problem of the elites. Elites having too much of everything, too much wealth, too much power, and recently have been discovered to be not all that elite, not very good at what they do, failing all of us. And so that would sort of explain this elite class. It's not, we don't have an aristocracy, supposedly.
Well,
But it's sort of like that, right? So,
and Hollywood, the whole idea, let me interrupt you and I'll just try to put that into perspective. Hollywood and the media supports this with the creation of celebrities. Okay, the role that celebrities play in our society is to justify this elite and is to humanize them in a way that we consider these celebrities to be our friends. What happened to Brad today? Did he break up with Angelina? Is he going to get back together with what was her name from Friends? People actually read the magazines and they relate to the celebrities in a way that they consider their friends. They feel this real connection to them, and it's a way of watching TV. You see it with people talk about Game of Thrones. They talk about whatever is happening in this entertainment industry as a connection, as a connection they have to American culture, and what makes them feel a part of American culture and connected. It's not necessarily being connected to other people with different ideas or different ethnicities. That Black people watch Black TV, white people watch white TV. Everybody has their brand, but behind all of it, the celebrities serve this purpose of making us appreciate and support the elite. Okay, because the celebrities are the elite. And if they're nice people, and if they're good people like George Clooney, well, then the head of Exxon must be a good person too, and the head of the CIA must be a good person too. And of course, every show that you see on TV and all the celebrities are always playing heroes. They're always furthering these myths that we believe in. And even reality TV, which is taken on a life of its own, is just a sort of backhanded way of promoting all these myths and providing a sort of phony cohesion to our society. And it's a phony cohesion, and it's a substitute for direct interpersonal relationships on a political level with other people to try to make your lives better, which does not happen. There's never there. If all the celebrities got together tomorrow and they called for a national strike in the United States, well, there would be a national strike. But absent all these celebrities who tell us everything that we should do and we believe, it'll never happen. And it will never happen because they're never going to do something like that. But that's become the complete source of information that we have about how we should behave in America. And it's as frightening as anything else, but it's also part of this vast military industrial propaganda machine that is bombarding us 24 hours a day on TV and in the movies. And believe me when I say that, it may seem like it's somehow random, but it isn't. It's very intelligently and thoughtfully planned out to have exactly the effect that it's having.
Yeah, I mean, I would sort of agree that they're effective and competent, but I see they're also out of touch. They're out of touch with a large part of society, and I think that's showing lately. But one thing I did want to bring up is you mentioned that the elites are used to rally to get the people to rise up, and that did happen. The Obama administration made great use of celebrities.
Oh,
Uh,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, but then also the Democrats used the celebrities to rally against Trump too. And it was successful to some extent, but maybe not as powerful as they expected it to be.
Well, sure, but I mean,
Yeah,
Trump's
it's a whole
troops,
nother.
Trump's troops had like basically two overwhelming issues, and immigration was a big one, which the Democrats never talked about. But I remember driving to get my car. I had to have my car fixed, and uh, they had a guy come and pick me up, drive me home, and then come back and get me so I could get my car. And all the way, he kept talking about immigration. This was like 5 years ago. People down on the streets, normal, average, everyday people, average Joes and Josephines, were very concerned about immigration. I don't know what the political dynamic was, why the Democrats, did not wrestle with that issue more, uh, acknowledge it in a more public way. But it was obviously a driving force behind Trump and his troops. And the other issue is abortion. And you can see what's happening with that this week with the really draconian anti-abortion laws that are being passed across the country. I mean, absolutely, an assault on women. And it's like this reaction of going back and these are these are issues that are not showing some sort of enlightenment on the part of Trump supporters. It's like the lumpen proletariat is supporting Trump. These are the people that are supporting him are not enlightened people who are championing freedom and democracy. They're championing a return to oppression, and they're perfectly happy with anti-democratic measures. And you're going to find those kind of people in every society, and you see it happening. It's a phenomenon that's happening all around the world. But it would be a big mistake to think that Trump supporters are somehow, they may be anti-elite and anti-celebrity, but by no means mean that they're enlightened or pro-democracy, looking for a democratic country. They're revisionists. They're reactionaries. It's going back to a time that would be even more horrific, and which, at its core, supports this myth of the hero and these repressive forces that Trump is organizing across the country. As you see, the police forces and the military becoming more dominant and more oppressive all the time. So, it's a complicated issue, but it's a result of this the control that the political parties have over the news, and very much so the Democratic Party and its love affair with celebrities.
I think I would have to disagree with some of that. I think that some part of the Trump supporters fit the description that you mentioned. But I think there are a lot of others who rolled the dice on Trump. They heard his anti-interventionist stance and they believed it. They feared that we were going to end up in another large-scale war. And I think that there are a lot of people who are sort of contrarians and just so frustrated with the current system that they felt that he was going to disrupt it he was going to
Yes,
be
and
disruptive.
I agree with you
Okay, so they really
100%.
aren't the non-enlightened people.
Yeah, I think that's a very correct analysis, and I agree with it. And it's been amazing to see how that has played out. Okay, and it's largely libertarians who are supporting Trump in that regard. Okay, well, you know,
Maybe leaning, we could say libertarian
yeah,
leaning with
it
a
was the
strain.
Rand Paul kind of people who were anti-intervention, and they wanted, but I mean, there's nobody more reactionary than them, I mean, and they tend, but at the same time, you're true. What you
Yeah,
said is true, but their mistake in think was believing Trump, because any politician will tell you exactly what you want to hear in order to
right.
get elected. I mean, and the Democrats do it all the time. The Republicans do it all the time. They say, believe me, I will not go to war. I'm not going to start a war.
Yeah,
5 minutes after they're elected, what do? They start a war.
yeah,
And it's interesting to see the people who believed that Trump was actually going to be a non-interventionist are blaming Bolton and Pompeo for forcing Trump into having wars. I mean, it's as if Trump is, his whole image is that nobody tells him what to do. Nobody affects him. He's the guy that's in control. If you disobey him, you're fired. And the whole idea that Bolton and Pompeo are controlling him is just antithetical to everything that Trump is. And it's not true. Trump was never a non-interventionist. He just said that because he thought that it would get this demographic that we're talking about to follow him. And now they're all feeling rather betrayed, just like Americans always end up feeling betrayed. The non-interventionists always end up feeling betrayed by whoever their leader is, because intervention is the essence of America's foreign policy. And it has to do with, it's just the secret part of American foreign policy, which again is represented by the CIA and the military. Okay, we don't have a military that's 10 times bigger than any other nation's military because we're non-interventionist. If Trump was not going to be an interventionist, he would have cut the military budget in half. But he didn't. He expanded it. So right away, if you see what he does in fact, which is to increasing the size of the military and then increasing the size of our police forces and their power here at home in order to repress any kind of dissent against his interventionist policies. It may be creating cognitive dissonance and those people who supported Trump because they thought he was a non-interventionist, and he said he was against the CIA, which was one of the biggest jokes in the world. The CIA is stronger than it ever was, and he's more supportive than ever of the CIA. It's just he was speaking out of both sides of his mouth. Okay, and people are starting to realize that now, that Donald Trump, who never told a lie in his life, is lying to them too.
yeah. I'm not sure about that. The whether or not he was always in alignment with the CIA. It looks more to me, and of course, this is just someone from the outside looking in, like there's some kind of a factional war within the elite classes, and that he is aligned with one of them and not the other. Um, because I don't think John Brennan is pretending when he attacks him, calls him a traitor. There's some type of a factional war going on there. I mean,
Well,
do you see that?
think of it this way. There was a transformation that was taking place, okay? And the transformation was the power that belongs to the CIA was being transferred to Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump, if there's anything that defines him, it's his lust for power, okay? And if the CIA's institutional executive was resisting transferring its power to Trump, then that would have created tensions within the organization. But that was 3 years ago. All the CIA's power has been transferred to Donald Trump. He is the president of the United States. He created his own National Security Council. The CIA answers to the National Security Council. John Bolton tells the woman who now heads the CIA what she's going to do. She salutes, like Evan Parker saluted when Colby told him what to do. And they go off and do what they're told to do. It's a military organization. It's set up like a military organization, just like the Army. Your superior tells you what to do, you go do it. Donald Trump is the commander in chief. All the power of the CIA now belongs to him. And it's a horrible, terrible thing to think of for a megalomaniac like Trump. Now controls the CIA, but that is the fact. That's the fact of life that everybody has to accept and internalize, because he can now tell the CIA to do whatever he wants. And if you look around the world, you've seen it happening everywhere. And to think that he's not using this power that he has is a terrible self-delusion.
Right. It remains to be seen whether the
country went through this vast period of adjustment with Trump becoming president and acquiring all these powers, but he now has them.
Yeah, he does. It remains to be seen whether all the retired, the ones, I guess some people say once a CIA officer, always a CIA officer, but the Brennans and everyone who's part of his faction, it remains to be seen whether they will ever obey Donald Trump. There's some kind of a revolt going on, but the current intelligence apparatus, yeah, apparently he does have that power. It took him a while to wrangle it.
Sure,
but he does have it now.
And that's a very astute point. And I'll go back to Colby. And we can wrap it up today with me finishing up with one pertinent anecdote about Colby. Okay. Colby's oldest daughter committed suicide through anorexia. And it was a result of all the terrible publicity that Colby got in that period that you were talking about, the church committing.
Right.
Okay. And she was just devastated. All his children were devastated to know that when their father went and defended the Phoenix program and the CIA, and it was just horrible for them to realize all the things that he had done and he had kept secret from them, and to have it all exposed to the whole country. Okay. Now, Colby then got divorced from his wife, Barbara, who he had been married to for many years. Okay. And Colby was a Catholic. So what happens when a Catholic gets divorced? Well, Colby had essentially run within the CIA, the Catholic clique. He was there's like you talk about a Brennan faction versus a Trump faction. Well, yeah, sure. There are all these factions in the CIA. There's a Likud faction in the CIA of Jewish officers who are aligned to the Likud party in Israel. And anyway, so getting back to Colby, just to give you an idea of why I believe what I believe, as opposed to maybe what you believe, although they're not so different. It's just a question of how much I understand it and on a personal level. So Colby had divorced his wife, Barbara, and he married a young woman who was a Democrat, 20 years younger than him. And when I met him at his house in Georgetown for our second interview, I met her, and they were doing all the things that a former CIA officer and his young wife from the State Department would do. They were on the phone to the Mexicans instead of the Filipinos. It was the same exact thing happening over. But while I was interviewing CIA officers, they had all taken sides. And it was at that time Colby versus Helms. And almost all of the CIA officers were angry at Colby for divorcing his wife, Barbara, who many of them had known for 20 years.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And there were all these things were happening where inside there were all these tensions. Plus there was Helms, Richard Helms became was CIA director before Colby. Okay, and he had run the organization for many years. And he was your typical Protestant, waspy kind of guy. And there was a hell, and he was the guy who kept the secrets. He never revealed anything to Congress. And Colby revealed all the secrets to Congress, and people were vilifying him for doing that. So there were all these internal conflicts going on within the CIA when I was interviewing all these CIA officers, just like what you're seeing now. Okay. And let me tell you, as a matter of fact, when somebody told them what to do, a superior officer told them what to do, all these internal conflicts vanished in a second. And they saluted and went off and did what they were told to do. Nobody was going to subvert the CIA as an institution because of their petty human feuds with each other. They all, to a large extent, believe that all of them are in it for the same purpose, the same overall purpose, which is protecting the state, which is what they call the state, not a particular government. The CIA exists above and beyond the political cycle in the United States, which is why it's called the deep state. Its interests go beyond political parties, even though there are members of it that are at each other's throats. I mean, really, they hate each other, but they have a higher purpose, which is to represent the state. And the state is the part that's enduring beyond whatever, it's this whole idea of a constitution and laws and stuff like that. That's the thing that they see themselves as protecting. And most of them are ideologues who believe in God and country. And it is not, and they are the sorts of people who really do not want to see immigrants here. They want to conquer the world, and they see America as this, really. I never interviewed a black CIA officer, and I interviewed 200 CIA officers. I didn't start seeing CIA officers who were black until I started getting into the DEA, and they started actually letting them into the CIA in the 1970s and 80s, and they're still few and far between. It's a racist organization. Believe me when I tell you that. And it's a God-fearing organization. They hate communists. They fight communists. They hate Muslims. You're not going to find many Muslims, they're perfectly happy waging war against Muslim countries. It represents a state, the United States as it is with a state, and that goes all the way back to its formation under guys like slaveholders Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, an elite who considered themselves better and above the hoi polloi. And that is still the dominant class issue that rules the CIA and transcends any of its petty political bickering.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, now, yeah. The state and the empire. I would say that they're the keepers of the empire. Yeah.
The state is now an empire. And it's their duty to protect the empire. The Westinghouse nuclear power plant in the Philippines is part of the empire, and so we got to control the Philippines. And anyway, I hope that anecdote about Colby being a Catholic and getting divorced and all all the Catholics hating him for that and really being disappointed in him is sort of a metaphor for what goes on with Brennan and Trump. But in the when you get right down to the nitty gritty, there's still soldiers who salute and do what they're told to do. And if you're outside the CIA, you can sort of voice that sort of stuff if you're a John Brennan. But again, he was a director, and he has certain latitude that the average CIA guy does not.
Right. All right. Well, I need to let you go, and I appreciate your time. Doug, tell everyone where first of all, I hope we can continue this. I'm going to try to talk you into that later, into some specific topics. But this is I think a really good intro and overall analysis which I appreciate a lot. But please do tell people where they can find your work and how they can support your work.
Okay, just go to my website, www.douglasvalentine.com, and there's links to where people can buy my books from the publishers rather than getting them on Amazon and stuff like that. I actually have 3 books right now that are in transition from one publisher to another. So when that all happens, I'll be, broadcasting where people can get them in their, under their new publishers. But just go to my website, and if you see a book you are interested in, then get it from the publisher.
Yes, yeah,
There's links to all that there. And I've written some poetry too, and I have some poetry books available.
great. All right. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, and I really enjoyed your challenging questions. A lot of people just accept everything I said, but I was very glad that you brought up Brennan and current events. It's very interesting, and it's really the reason that people need to understand the CIA, because it is something that's impacting everything you do right now.
Right. It sure is.
Okay.
All right. Take care. Thank you for listening. Special thanks to Douglas Valentine. Follow Doug on Twitter at DougValentine77. And find his books and writing and archives on his website, DouglasValentine.com. Around the Empire's listener-supported independent media. Pitch in if you can at patreon.com/AroundTheEmpire, paypal.me/AroundTheEmpirePod. A special thanks to my longtime patrons and new patrons, contributors, everybody who's messaged me with suggestions and feedback. Every bit helps, and I really do appreciate it. It makes a difference. The audio podcast is the main focus here on Around the Empire. It has been the main focus, where we have the most traffic. There are many ways to listen to it. Find it and subscribe on your favorite mobile podcast app. Listen to it on the website, aroundtheempire.com, or on patreon.com/aroundtheempire, or on YouTube, youtube.com/aroundtheempire. If you're listening to this on YouTube, hit the thumbs up to like the video. Leave me a comment. Don't forget to subscribe. We're still working on a new look, new kinds of content here, video streams and such, and I really would appreciate your help in building up that YouTube channel. We'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.